Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of SEPA Paranormal Chronicles. Today, I'm more than delighted to have with me Richard Freeman. Richard is from the UK. He's a cryptozoologist and author, a zoological journalist, and web TV presenter. Richard, thank you for joining me, my friend. How are you doing?
Fine, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I know we've just been talking offline, but the UK's been having a little bit of a heat wave. It's good to see that you're surviving.
Yes, we've had 3 days, one after the other, which has broken the record, each one breaking the record for the hottest day ever recorded in Britain. Last December, I was in northeast India looking for giant crocodiles in the mangrove swamps, and it wasn't as hot as it is in England.
That is absolutely crazy. And you know damn well now that that's it. That is your summer done and dusted now. You're going to get unsettled weather between now and the rest of the year. You just know it's going to happen.
Well, we don't get snow like we used to. I mean, when I was a kid, we'd have snowdrifts like 6 foot up the front door, and we haven't seen that in years, which I can honestly say I don't miss because I hate snow. But I remember even like 15 years ago, Christmas Day, the roses were blooming in my granddad's front garden, and he said, "This isn't right."
Yeah, sure. I remember working in London. As a paramedic. I started in London, then moved to Leicester, and we had one week where there was absolute tons of snow, and London absolutely became gridlocked. So no matter where we went, if we were finishing the shift, starting the shift, going to get fuel or whatever, everywhere had to be on lights and sirens. Otherwise, we would not have gone through it. And I had to stay at a friend's house because the snow was that bad. I couldn't even get back to where I was staying in Hitchin, which was ridiculous. But yeah, we get it over here all the time, and it's like, it's second nature now. It's like, oh yeah, it's snowing. Okay, no biggie. And we'll just carry on our normal day.
It swings now from floods, massive floods every year. And I remember the first one I saw was the year 2000. I'd just come back from Thailand looking for giant snakes in Thailand. And I was going up to Newcastle to do a talk. And it took me as long to get to Newcastle as it did to get to Thailand. And on the way back, it took twice as long because we had to go around Wales because of all of the floods. So it's either drought in summer or floods in winter, and it's the two extremes now.
Yeah, that's crazy. But one of the things I'm also excited to talk to you about is you're a little bit of a Doctor Who fan.
I am a massive fan of classic Doctor Who. If you ask me what my religion was, it would be classic Doctor Who. I like the first 5 Doctors, up to and including Peter Davison. My favourite is John Pertwee, with Tom Baker a close second. The new stuff, when it came back, a triumph of style over substance. It had some good actors. I like Peter Capaldi, who reminds me a lot of John Pertwee, but they were just not given the scripts to work with. When it got it right with stuff like Blink, it could knock it out of the stadium, but mostly it was show over substance. And then they cast Jodie Whittaker just to tick woke boxes, and myself and 60% of the viewers turned off. Instead of course correcting, they said, "Oh, you're all bigots, you're all ists and phobes and neckbeards. We're going to show you the first Doctor wasn't William Hartnell, it was a little girl." So even more people switched off when they did the Timeless Child rubbish. And then they said, "Oh, right, you bigots, we'll teach you a lesson. Now the Doctor's going to be gay." And the tiny few that were hanging on switched off, and now it got cancelled. And those are the wages of woke. We've seen it time and time again with, not just with Doctor Who, we've seen it with The Witcher, we've seen it with Star Wars, we've seen it with Star Trek. The new animated Batman series, The Cape Crusader, the gender swap the Penguin and the Mad Hatter. Nobody likes it. No, this is done just to satisfy those wokerati that have crawled into places of power, and they don't give a damn about not making money. They don't give a damn about not pleasing the fans. All they give a damn about is preaching their ridiculous, pathetic message. And I'm a card-carrying lefty, but I think wokeness, as what it means today, not what it meant originally, but what it means today, is a goddamn cancer. And it's like a scatological version of King Midas. Everything it touches turns to shit. But the real Doctor Who, particularly the peak in the 70s with John Pertwee and Tom Baker, that was fantastic. That was inspirational to me because it was more about horror than it was about science fiction. You've got the giant maggots crawling out of the slag heaps in Wales, and you've got the sea devils rising up from the ocean to destroy mankind. You've got the autons that can possess anything plastic and turn it into a killer, and then they manifest as the great Lovecraftian tentacled creature. It is Lovecraft meets Quatermass, and it was Doctor Who at its finest. And that, along with David Attenborough, things like The World About Us and Fabulous Animals and Life on Earth, that's what got me interested in mysterious creatures. When I left school, I was a zookeeper for many years. I worked at Twycross Zoo, where they had the PG Tips chimps. If there are any Brits listening to this, they'll remember the PG Tips chimps from the adverts. But I ran the reptile house there for a number of years. And then I got involved with an organisation called the Centre for Fortean Zoology, the biggest mystery animal investigation group in the world. So I moved down to Devon, where they were based. And since then, I've been all over the world, to every corner of the globe, on the track of all kinds of bizarre creatures.
That's pretty cool story. And just for the record, John Pertwee was my first Doctor as well. But I've also been extremely lucky because I'm involved with Comic Con over here. So quite a few of the new ones up to Peter Capaldi, I've met them all. And I did actually find out that Karen Gillan, who played Amy Pond, I'm actually related to by marriage.
Oh,
it's
right.
Like I did my ancestry, and I actually asked her at one of the conventions, and she went, "Yeah, that person's my grandfather." And the grandfather's sister was married to my uncle. So it's a very small world. But the reason why we are here is due to your cryptozoology antics that you've been up to. You've mentioned it a little bit already, and you've mentioned how you got into it, starting off at the reptile house at the zoo. So let's go into some of your expeditions. What was the first one that you actually went out on and went investigated?
The first one I ever did was to Thailand, to the jungles, rivers and caves of Thailand, looking for these giant snakes called Nagas. In Thai and Indo-Chinese mythology, Nagas are gigantic snakes with a fin or a crest on the head, much bigger than anything known to science. Despite being thought of as purely legendary, people still report seeing these gigantic snakes. I talked to the head of the river police on the Mekong River, and he said he saw this immense snake. At first he thought it was debris in the water, and then he realised it was swinging against the flow of the water, and it was this gigantic snake, 60 feet long. And I talked to another old man who had been exploring some caves. He discovered this network of caves in the jungle, and he took us to these caves, and we were the first Westerners ever to go down them. And he took us down this network of caves, and this old guy, he reminded me a bit of Albert Steptoe. And I thought, we were all going through by candlelight, and we were like miles under the ground in these claustrophobic caves. And I thought, God, if this old guy pegs it now, we're never getting out because no one knows we're here. And we can't find the way back out. But he'd been exploring, and he came to an underground river, and he saw one of these things swimming through the river. And he said it was black with a greenish sheen to it, and it was like 50, 60 feet long, as thick as around as a barrel. But that was the first one I did.
What was your experiences like, knowing that you're looking for this giant snake, and also being in Thailand?
Well, it was fantastic. It was my first time in Asia, and I've visited Asia many times since, and I absolutely loved it. Another witness was an abbot of a monastery. There was a ruined temple, and they were trying to repair the temple. And they said every time the workmen went down into the cellar, there was this monstrous black snake down there that terrified them. So the monks all prayed, and the snakes left.
That's crazy, and it's interesting that you say about that the monks were doing the praying, because if these things are flesh and blood creatures, they're not going to be of a spiritual, like, what's the word I'm looking for, like, building, if you like.
By prayer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I was getting at. I completely lost my words there. Yeah, but so the fact that they prayed and got rid of the snakes, you could say, if you have a rational mind, that was purely coincidental. So what's your thoughts on that?
In this case, I think it was purely coincidental. A lot of animals have magical attributes or fantastical attributes put on them. But the natives in Central Africa used to think that gorillas tore the branches from trees and used them to fight elephants, and they'd carry off native girls and rape them and stuff. They don't do any of these things. It's all nonsense. And there's a snake in the Sudan called a sand boa. It's a small, harmless snake. It's a constrictor. It feeds mainly on rodents. And it's a couple of feet long. But they call it the apris, and they believe it's so venomous that it doesn't even have to bite you. Even if it touches you, you'll die. A bit like the salamander in medieval Europe. But of course, it doesn't. But sometimes these legendary attributes turned out to have a basis in fact. There's a type of huge tree frog called the giant monkey tree frog in South America. And the natives said it had the power to stop hunger and thirst, and it made you invisible in the jungle. And when biochemists looked at its secretions, they found that it negated feelings of hunger and thirst, and it masked your scent, so effectively making you invisible in the jungle.
Wow. And that's not the one that some of the tribesmen rub their arrow blades.
No, they're the poison dart frogs. They're different. Right. There's another animal called the hero shrew, and it comes from the jungles of Central Africa. It's a tiny little shrew, and the local people there, the warriors, put its pelt on their belt because they believe it gives them strength. And they say it's so strong it can support the weight of a man on its spine, and it can. Nobody knows why, because there are other species of shrew in the same area that don't have that power, but it's got like a network of bony struts that strengthen the spine, and nobody knows why that this one species of shrew has it and others don't.
What because like shrews are kind of like not very big at all. So the fact that they can
mouse.
Yeah, and the fact that they carry the weight of a man, that's absolutely bonkers. That's good. So moving on from Thailand, after searching for giant crested snakes, correct me if I'm wrong, but Indonesia was your next location.
Yes, for the Orang Pendek, and this is the creature I've searched for the most. I've been back to the Indonesian island of Sumatra 6 times now to look for the Orang Pendek. Its name in Malay means the short man, and it is supposed to be a upright walking primate, 3 to 5 feet tall. So it's not massive like the Yeti. Covered in hair, walking erect like a man with a very human looking face, and it lives in the jungles of Sumatra, and it's been reported ever since the first Dutch settlers went to the island, and the natives had said it's always been in the forest. And I went there 6 times, and I found its footprints and its handprints, which are different from the orangutan. and the footprints are different from any other ape. I've seen ape footprints in all kinds of mediums. Then this is different. It has a much broader heel for weight bearing because it walks erect, and the handprints are different to an orangutan. They're more like a small gorilla with a much larger thumb, and it lacks the elongate fingers of the orangutan. But I've heard the creature calling on numerous occasions. It makes a number of calls, and one of them, bizarrely, it sounds like the laugh of Skeletor. Do you remember a camp and rather preachy cartoon called He-Man and the Masters of the Universe?
Yeah.
Skeletor had this high-pitched laugh, the villain. Well, the Orang Pendek makes a noise like Skeletor's laugh. It's really bizarre. And we brought back hair that was found near one of these footprints, and it was examined by a man called Lars Thomas, who is a Danish biologist, and he's one of the world's leading experts in animal hair. They couldn't get DNA off it. The only DNA they got were of the native guides who had picked it up with their hands, unfortunately. They should have picked it up with tweezers, but they picked it up with their hands. But the scale arrangement on it and the structure of it was different to any other primate. And he said it's a primate, it's related to the Sumatran orangutan, but it's not the Sumatran orangutan. So I can only conclude there's a large unknown species of primate in Sumatra. Now, on Sumatra, there's the Sumatran orangutan in the north, and then there's the Tapanuli orangutan, which lives in central Sumatra. That was only identified in 2017. And then we've got this, which seems to be a new ground-dwelling species of orangutan. That's what I think Orang Pendek is. And I've spoke to so many witnesses. One of the times I was there, we got together about 24 witnesses who'd all either seen the footprints or seen the animal, and they were all describing this same creature, a short, barrel-chested, long-armed ape walking erect, not a gibbon, and it's amongst the most likely of all of the cryptids, and I've been close to it twice. I mean, I've heard it calling from yards away, and the last time I was there, I heard one calling from behind a stand of bamboo, and a colleague of mine went round to the other side to try and scare it back to me where I was hiding with the camera, and it took off at an angle and just caught a glimpse of something rushing off into the jungle. But we've come so close to finding the Orang Pendek. There's a guy called Adam Thorne, who's an Aussie bloke, a really good researcher. He's just come back from Sumatra, and he got on camera trap what might be the arm of an Orang Pendek, and he's waiting for all the eDNA samples that he's having analysed. He's waiting for them to come back. So it's very likely that it's a new species of ape.
Wow. So why is this one so close to your heart, the fact that you've been back to Sumatra on numerous occasions?
Because we've come so close to finding it, and it's so likely to exist. You wouldn't get me spending reams of money going after the chupacabra, because I think it's essentially a media creation. I don't think there's anything to it. It's a media creation and an urban legend. I don't think there's a real animal at the bottom of it. So you wouldn't get me wasting my money looking for something like the Orang Pendek. You wouldn't get me wasting my money looking for something like the chupacabra, but I would look for something like the Orang Pendek. So it's very likely to exist, and you've got a fighting chance of finding it. I've come close to seeing it twice.
And that is so cool, the fact that you might be on the verge of discovering a new species.
There's a guy called Dave Archer, and he came on one of our expeditions, and first expedition he ever did, first day in the jungle, he saw the Orang Pendek. He said it was squatting in a tree, and it had thick, dark fur, a bit like a mountain gorilla, a very human-looking face, and it realised it had been seen, and he could see it looked frightened. Its eyes were darting about, and it climbed down out of the tree and walked away on two legs.
Wow. Now, we've been over the border into the US, and when you get asked by the border guards why you're there, and we're going, no, we're going to investigate this haunted location. You're going to do what? We're going to investigate this haunted location. And they kind of look at you like you've got two heads. So, what kind of response do you get when you turn up at all these locations and go, yeah, I'm here to investigate a giant crested snake or a bipedal ape-type creature that we haven't discovered yet? What kind of response do you get?
Well, most of the people have heard of it and believe it, and some of them have even seen it or know people that have seen it. And one of the things we've been looking for recently is the Caspian tiger, which is a subspecies of tiger that was supposed to have been hunted into extinction in the 1960s from Central Asia. And 3 times we've been to Tajikistan looking for it. And everyone we spoke to had either seen one or knew someone that had seen one. And we talked to a park ranger that had seen one just a month before we were there. We talked to hunters, honey farmers, imams who'd all seen it, and some of them had seen them with cubs. Biology teacher who had seen.
Wow. So, yeah, I know that you've been to multiple locations, and we're going to talk about a few more in a minute. But what would happen, and let's use the Orang Pendek as an example. Currently, because you've not had a clear glimpse of it, you've heard it, you've seen evidence of it, it's still classed as a cryptid. But once it gets discovered, and we got the name for it, the Orang Pendek, surely then it's no longer classed in the cryptid category. Would that be kind of correct?
Yes, yeah. It would become accepted by mainstream science. And a lot of mainstream scientists feel that the Orang Pendek is a real creature. But this has happened before with animals that were thought to be completely mythological. The Komodo dragon, the mountain gorilla, the giant squid. Well, in France in the 18th century, there was a biologist who specialised in mollusks, and he was called Pierre Denis de Montfort. And he wrote lots of books on mollusks. And he worked with the botanical gardens and the Natural History Museum, and he went as far afield as Egypt collecting specimens. And he got talking to whalers from Nantucket who had come to Paris to live in Paris, and they told him about sucker marks found on sperm whales, huge sucker marks, and how dying sperm whales vomit up huge tentacles. And he realised that there was a giant squid bigger than anything known to science, and this was probably where the legend of the Norse legend of the kraken comes from. So he wrote a book about giant squid and giant octopus, and then he became a scientific pariah. He lost his job, no one would employ him. He was reduced to selling seashells, and he ended up dying of starvation in a Parisian gutter in 1820. And in the 1850s, he was proved correct when the first giant squid was actually captured. But he's been,
Wow.
Not only was he ostracised by mainstream science, he's been largely forgotten as well. I think he needs to be rehabilitated. I call him the prophet of the kraken.
That's, yeah. And that also kind of brings me to the point that, when we were kids, it doesn't matter if you saw a cryptid, a UFO, a ghost, or whatever. You was either ridiculed or you were told to sit down, be quiet, shut up, kind of thing. Whereas nowadays, there's more of it in the mainstream. People are seeing more evidence. They're hearing more things. They're seeing UFOs, or they're seeing spirits or whatever, and it's kind of becoming normal conversation for people to talk about on a regular basis.
Yes, it is. Well, you did get things that were reported. Do you remember Nationwide?
Yeah.
So it's Nationwide. It's time to go Nationwide. They covered the Hexham werewolf scare. Do you remember that?
I do actually. Yeah. That's a blast from the past.
They've just found the the footage again for it that they'd lost. And this is supposedly a couple of stone heads dug up in a garden in Hexham that brought with them not only a poltergeist outbreak, but this sort of phantom wolf man that was seen by the family, the neighbours, and then Dr. Anne Ross, who's an expert in Celtic Britain, who thought these heads were made by the ancient Celts. She took them to her house, and then she saw the thing, and so did her daughter. But they've been lost now. Nobody knows where the Hexham heads are. But I remember being 5 years old and watching that on Nationwide and thinking it was fantastic that a news programme was covering werewolves. Now, a mate of mine who's older than me, he was 10 at the time, and it scared him so much. He lives down near London, on the outskirts of London. He thought that the werewolf was coming all the way from Hexham specifically to kill him. So he reasoned that the way to escape it was put all his teddies and cuddly toys around him at night. When the werewolf burst into his room, while it was tearing them to shreds, he'd escape while it was ripping the teddies apart. And he used to cuddle this big teddy that was as big as him at night, frightened of this werewolf, and ended up losing his virginity to this teddy.
Okay, then. I don't know what to say to
My
that.
friend lost his virginity to a giant teddy bear thanks to the Hexham werewolf and Nationwide.
Well, that's a definite claim to fame that I don't think anybody would be proud of, really. So, moving on, this side of the pond we have the Sasquatch, we have the Yeti, but you went to Guyana to look for the Di-Di?
Yes, well, we were mainly looking for the giant anaconda, but we also heard stories about the Di-Di, which is a sort of hairy wild man from the mountains. And we didn't find anybody that's seen it directly. We just heard secondhand stories about it. There was one story. We stopped in a native village, and they said that a few years ago, the next village along, which was about 15 miles away, a boy and a girl were walking home from school when one of these things sort of stepped out of a stand of trees, grabbed the girl, pulled her into the trees. She was never seen again. And there was never an official investigation because the native people in Guyana are very much third-class citizens in their own country.
So, technically it could have been, a homeless person, for example.
But they said it was a huge ape-like creature covered in hair.
Yeah.
But we heard, unfortunately, when we went, there was a drought, and it was the worst drought that anyone could remember. Even the native people said that they would never known it. Like, I think it was hotter than it has been here. It's the hottest I've ever been anywhere. And we were collapsing with, fatigue from the heat. It was unbelievable because we weren't in the jungle. We were on the grasslands, the savannah. And we saw the tracks of anaconda, and we heard accounts of massive anacondas, but we didn't see any. But everywhere we went, people were saying they'd seen these red-faced pygmies. Our guide had seen one, Damon Corrie, who's a chief of the Eagle Clan Arawak people. And we met so many people that say that there's a race of little hairy pygmies about 3 feet tall, and they paint their faces red, and everyone's seen them and reported them.
Wow. And it's great to hear these stories because, in the modern world, we kind of, you can go into the woods, you can hear noises that are not animals, you can look into the sky, you can see, light anomalies that may or may not be a UFO. But then you go to some of these countries that are not as modernized, shall we say, and you get all these stories that, of pygmies and of, Yeti-like hominids and that kind of thing. And it's absolutely fascinating that you can pull these stories from, countries, and bring them into the modern world so people learn about them.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I'd like to go back to Guyana and other parts of South America to look for the giant anaconda, but I wouldn't go at the height of the dry season again because it's blisteringly hot. Certainly not on the savannah, maybe in the jungle where there's shade. But giant snakes are one of these things that have been reported from a number of places. I mean, all over South America, tropical South America, there have been consistent reports of giant anacondas for the past 200 years, more than. And in Africa too. And one of the best photographs of a cryptid was taken in 1959 by a charter pilot called Remy van Leyden, and he was a fighter pilot in World War II. And he'd been captured by the Nazis and put in a concentration camp in Spain. He escaped and got to Britain on foot, joined the RAF, and went straight back into war again. And after the war, he was a charter pilot in what was then the Belgian Congo. And he was flying over an area of the Congo near Katanga, and he came across a clearing. And as they passed the clearing, he saw a massive snake come out of a hole in the ground. And he said it was green with a pale underbelly. And he said it was about 50 feet long. And as they went over, it reared up. And its head was about 2 feet wide and 3 feet long. And it reared up 10 feet. And they made 3 passes so that one of the other guys could photograph it. And there's a photograph of this immense snake on the ground. He reckoned that they were about 40 meters up, and this snake was about 15 meters long, 50 feet. Well, recently, using Google Earth, they found this clearing, and it's got the same rock formations. And they've worked out that if Van Leyden was correct, saying they're about 40 meters up, and this snake would have been as big as he said it was, about 50 foot. So that's quite big enough to constrict a horse or a cow and swallow it whole.
Wow. So what? Okay, yeah, we know that there's big boa constrictors and there's other big snakes that have been identified. So, at what point would you start using the term giant compared to normal sizes of some of the big snakes that we have?
Anything over 30 feet or class as giant.
Okay. So like the fact that he said it was 50, that would that it was have us as like a light snack for breakfast and then move on to something bigger.
Yeah, there was
Wow.
a guy, an Italian guy, Gatti, his name was. I think his name was something like Attila Gatti, but he was an Italian explorer who took about 8 expeditions into Africa. He was the first person to capture okapis for zoos, and he claims to have shot a python that attacked him in a cave in Africa, and he measured it at 37 feet. So that's another monster snake.
Wow. And the thing is, though, people say that we're going to go to Mars, and it's a place that people have never been to, and it's going to be investigated. But there's so many different places on Earth that no one's ever investigated. So how do we know what kind of creatures are living there? And it's the same with the seas. We've only investigated like 30%.
We have a false notion that the world has all been mapped and explored, and it hasn't, even in the age of satellite photography, because you can't see through jungle canopies, and you can't see to the bottom of the ocean. And there's large swathes of Africa, Central Africa, tropical Asia, South America, that have not been fully mapped. Even Tasmania. I've been to Tasmania 3 times looking for the Tasmanian wolf, the dog-like flesh-eating marsupial. And even parts of that haven't been properly mapped. And that's about the size of Ireland, but less than 500,000 people live there. And they're mainly in Hobart and Launceston. And their towns are like villages, and their villages are like hamlets. And then when you get to the west of the island, there's just massive of wilderness. I've been there 3 times. I spoken to so many people that have seen the Tasmanian wolf. I spoke to an old guy, he's passed away now, but in the 70s he used to work for a hydroelectric scheme, and he was driving to work with 5 other people. And they said they saw one in the middle of the road, and they stopped and looked at it, and there was no ambiguity about what it was. They all had it in view, in plain view, very closely. I talked to another man who is employed by the government to shoot feral cats because domestic cats are a bloody menace. When they get anywhere, they get out and breed, and they kill all the birds and small mammals. And he goes out shooting them, and he goes right into the wilderness. He'd seen the Tasmanian wolf twice. Another guy we spoke to ran an arboretum where they keep trees, and he said he'd seen one with his wife, and it was running along the side of the road, trying to get under a barbed wire fence, looking for a place to get under. And he said there was a car full of people behind him that had seen it as well. And they've got a very distinctive smell and a very distinctive bark. They've got high-pitched, spasmodic yap, yap, yap. And I talked to a park ranger, and he says, yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that. I'm not seeing it, but I've heard that yap many times. And one time I was in a remote place in the outback, in the forest, and I got this distinctive smell, very similar to a hyena. And all the old bushmen who were there in the days when we know it was about, they said it smelt like a hyena, because most of them had been in Africa in the Boer War, and they knew what hyenas smelt like. And they said that the Tasmanian wolf smelt like a hyena, and one of the other names for it was the hyena. There's a place called Hyena Hill that's named after them. They're not related at all to hyenas or to wolves or to tigers. They're related to the Tasmanian devil and other flesh-eating marsupials. But I got this very distinct hyena-like smell, as if this thing had just crossed the path about 5 minutes before.
Wow.
I'm pretty sure it's still out there, and I want to go back and deep into the Franklin Gordon wilderness to look for it. And I think it's probably still around in New Guinea as well, because we have the fossils from New Guinea, and New Guinea is one of the most unexplored places in the world, and the hill tribes in New Guinea talk about this animal that they call the dobsonga, which they say looks like a dog. It has stripes down its back and a stiff tail like a kangaroo, and its jaws open very wide, and it comes down to kill livestock. And they say you'll only find it when there's plenty of prey species around. If there's not many prey species, it won't be there. But it goes wherever the prey is, and it will kill livestock. And they don't hunt it because it's taboo. And that's a perfect description of the Tasmanian wolf.
Wow. And you've been to so many fascinating places that half the people can't even imagine to go in a lifetime. So out of all the places that you've been to, and we've touched on a fair few, we've not touched on all of them, and you can't have Sumatra because you've been there 6 times already, but is there one kind of place where you could go, okay, I've decided to leave England, I want to go somewhere where I can investigate a particular creature for the rest of my life? Where would you go to?
Well, my favourite place I've been to, I think, is Mongolia, because I mean, I wouldn't want to live there, but it's so remote and so alien. It's like stepping out onto another world. The landscape is so bizarre and so different. Parts of it are sort of red and rocky like the surface of Mars. Other places have chips of mica that make it look like a mirror. Other places are tiny little bits of gravel that look like cat litter stretching off into infinity. And you'll see mirages made by heat haze that look like minarets or lakes or stuff. And we had our camp completely destroyed by a tornado, rather a whirlwind in the desert that started out as a little dust devil and got bigger and bigger and closer, and then it was on the camp and it wrecked our camp, and I was clinging to the side of the van like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, looking up into the eye of the storm and seeing one of our drivers being whipped round and round and round 15 feet in the air, holding the shredded remains of one of our tents. But we were looking for something called the Mongolian Death Worm. And this is, the locals call it Alroy Hoi Hoi, which means the intestine worm. And it's supposed to be a sausage or draft excluder shaped creature that comes up after rainfall in the remote Gobi. And Roy Chapman Andrews, the paleontologist, first heard about it in the 1920s. And there have been a number of expeditions for looking for it. But we went across 1,000 miles of the Gobi Desert and we talked to about 24 witnesses who were all describing the same creature. And there was one old man that seen it when he was a boy in the 30s, when he was out tending his family's camels and goats, and he went back and told his mum and dad, and they rounded up the animals, packed up their gur, which is the circular animal hide tents they use, and they moved out of the area. They were so scared. A death worm sighting can throw a whole community into a panic. They say it's supposed to spit a corrosive yellow saliva that acts like acid. And some people say that it can generate electricity like an electric eel and kill animals as large as camels with a blast of this electricity. But all the people I spoke to said that the electricity, they call it throwing lightning. They say that that is a fallacy and it doesn't do that. It's just a piece of folklore. But they did believe it was venomous and could spit, and they were terrified of it. We talked to one retired army colonel in an army base near the borders of China, and he said he'd been out patrolling in the early 70s, and he saw what he thought was a section of tire in the desert, and he got closer and he realised it was the death worm, and that sort of brick red, salami-shaped, scaly thing lying in the sun. And he said it had dew on its back, and the rising sun was sparkling on the dew, and he says that's where I think the electricity comes from, the idea that it's got this electrical power. That everyone's terrified of them, absolutely petrified of them. One person said they saw one come out of a hole in the desert and grab a mouse and eat a mouse. I think it's some sort of reptile. There are a group of burrowing reptiles called worm lizards, and they're not snakes and they're not lizards. They're in a little group of their own, the worm lizards or amphisbaenas. And I think it's a very large worm lizard that's undiscovered by science, or a very large sand boa that's undiscovered by science. But whatever it is, it's completely unknown to science. But in the same area, we had contemporary reports of dragons. There's a story about they're associated with water and rainfall. And they thought that they come down in clouds in the mountains, and they make the rainfall, and they can live in wells as well. And we heard of one story, and several different people told this story. They said there was supposed to be this dragon in a well, and an old man saw it rising up into the sky out of this well. And because this was in the communist period, local government officials took that as a religious story, because they closed down all the temples as well. They cracked down on religion. So they poured oil down the well and locked the well to teach the people a lesson. And so the story goes, within 2 weeks, 2 of these men were dead, and the other one was struck impotent and could never have children. And we heard, now that sounds, could be a modern day piece of folklore, but I heard a story about a doctor that saw one of these things. Now, the equivalent of a county in Mongolia is called a sum. And because Mongolia is so massive, it's the size of Western Europe, a sum can be the size of a small country. And there are travelling doctors that go to the sum centres, which are the capital of each sum, the largest conurbation within each sum. And we were told by the mayor of one of these sum centres that a couple of years ago, a doctor had been in this area, and he'd gone to raise water out of a well, and he said he saw something coiled up in the well that had a head like a horse or a camel with horns and a great long serpentine green body. And he said it was a dragon.
Wow, that's crazy. And I always
Modern day sightings of dragons are much more common than you'd think. Not just in Asia, you get them from all over Asia, but you get them all over the world. Last year I investigated a case from Waverley Abbey in Surrey, of all places, of a group of 10 people that gone out ghost hunting one night. And I've interviewed 5 of this 10, and they're all sane, and not one of them tried to exaggerate. What happened was, there was a Polish lady there called Dora, and she was looking out over these woods that are about a quarter of a mile, maybe, if that, from the ruins of Waverley Abbey. And she said she saw an immense animal with bat-like wings 10 metres across, flying above this wood, and she judged the wingspan against the trees and said it was about 10 metres, and it circled above the woods and then banked down into the woods. And then immediately after that, she was the only one of the 10 that saw that. Immediately after that, 2 smaller creatures came flying out of the woods on the other side of the ruins of Waverley Abbey. And these were smaller. They had wingspans of about 10 foot, but all 10 people saw these. One of them flew and landed on the abbey itself and folded up its wings, and they said it had a long tail at the back with an arrowhead on it, a long neck and an elongate head. And another one flew into a yew tree. And one of the other women there, a woman called Julia, said she was terrified. She had a feeling that this thing could just swoop down out of the tree and rip her to pieces if it wanted to. And I mean, at first I thought what they've seen is something like a heron flying around at night, and they've not recognised it because you don't expect herons to be flying around at night. But they said no, it didn't have feathers. The wings were like a bat's. I mean, this one guy called Luke said the wings were like a fruit bat's, only much, much bigger. They appeared to be black, but if you got them in torchlight, they were silver. The scales were silver. And then these things flew on again towards where the bigger one had been seen. I've interviewed these people about 3 times, and none of them try and exaggerate. There were no gnashing of teeth or spitting fire or anything like that. They just told you what they saw, and they produced sketches as well. And it wasn't any kind of bird. It wasn't a swan, a goose, a heron.
Wow. And it's
case
interesting that... Sorry, carry on.
Another case was from Iceland. And the guy I mentioned earlier, Lars Thomas, who does our hair analysis for us, he was contacted in 2010 when the volcano went off in Iceland. You know, and no one could fly across Europe for a week or so. Well, they thought the volcano was spitting out ash. I'm not even vaguely going to try and pronounce the name of the volcano. A guy contacted him and said, I was looking through binoculars at the column of ash coming out of the volcano, and I saw what I thought was a plane in the ash, and I thought a plane has flown into that column of ash and it's going to crash. And then he said, and then the plane started to beat its wings. And I realised what I was looking at was a dragon that had come up out of the volcano. And he said, either I've gone mad or I've seen a dragon. 2007, Oconto Falls, Wisconsin, USA, group of teenagers had been to a concert, and they were at a car park after the concert, and they saw a ball of orange and blue fire shoot across the sky. They thought it was a meteor or something, but it was quite low down. And then another one came, and they were wondering what the hell this was, and they all saw what they described as a white dragon. They said it had 4 legs, which it held up against its body, a long tail with an arrowhead at the end, these bat-like wings, a long neck and a wedge-shaped head, and it flew twice across this car park. And one of these youths went home and told his family, who didn't believe him, but later that night the thing turned up again and it flew over their house, and the mother and sister saw it, and they said it had 2 smaller ones with it, like the thing at Waverley Abbey, and they said it was the size of a plane. And this was investigated by Linda Godfrey. You may have heard of Linda Godfrey. She's most famous for investigating the Beast of Bray Road. She wrote a number of books on modern-day werewolf sightings, and she wrote this book about other monsters as well, called American Monsters, and she interviewed them. Another case from South Africa in the 70s. It's actually from Namibia, where there's a tradition of something called the flying snake of Namibia. A French farmer rings up the police and tells them he'd heard one of his cows screaming, went to investigate, and he said it was being bitten by this, what looked like a huge yellow serpent with horns and wings and smoke coming out of its nostrils. And he said, the only thing I can think to compare it with is a dragon. And he said it had a smell like burning tar. Now, years before, just after World War II, the son of a white farmer in Namibia said he was attacked by one of these things that flew down off a ridge and flew over his head, and he passed out. But he said it had a smell like burnt tar. And these are just a few. These are the tip of the iceberg. People report seeing dragons or dragon-like creatures all over the world. And obviously these are not flesh and blood animals. They're something paranormal.
Yeah.
But the dragon is found in every culture on Earth, every single culture on Earth. And the earliest representation of a dragon is from South Africa, these rock carvings from 75,000 years ago. And it shows a bushman performing some sort of ritual or some sort of what looks like a ritual or worship, and this great serpentine animal with its breath becoming water and rain.
Wow. So let's put our logical heads on just for a second, and let's believe the fact that dragons don't exist just for a second. If that is the case, what do you think these people saw? Do you think it's like an animal that hasn't been confirmed yet? Or is it something of a paranormal nature? Unknown cryptid?
What were real animals? If these things were real animals, we'd have known about it by now. They'd have been killing people, turning up on radar, attacking planes. But I think they're paranormal in nature, and they're either interdimensional, which many other strange creatures might be, or they are some form of tulpa or thought form, a gestalt thought form created by the fossil memories in the collective subconscious of mankind that can take on tangible form for a time. But whatever they are, they're paranormal. Well, if you talk about monsters and paint with very broad strokes, they fall into two categories. They're the real cryptids, the flesh and blood animals, which may be unknown to science or classed as extinct, but they're still around, or ordinary animals that have grown to giant sizes, giant crocodiles, giant pythons, things like that. And then you've got the weirder ones, like modern day sightings of dragons, modern day sightings of trolls, modern day sightings of werewolves and fairies and things like that. And the owl man, the Cornish owl man and the moth man and things like that, they are paranormal. Those are not flesh and blood animals.
Yeah, because when you talk to people, even about the likes of the Sasquatch and the Bigfoot, a lot of people do say this is a interdimensional creature. And that kind of thought and idea is becoming more upfront, that's what it is, rather than flesh and blood.
Well, there's about 100 legends of dragons in the UK alone. And in some of these legends, the thing just turns up, terrorizes an area, eats people and livestock, and then vanishes again as mysteriously as it came. And there's no hero that goes forth to battle it, no damsel in distress, no hoard of treasure, nothing like that. It just appears, terrorizes an area, then vanishes. And it's written about in local records and things, which sounds like some of the mystery animals we see today, which just appear and disappear. Now, with the Yeti, I think that it's a flesh and blood animal. I've hunted the Yeti in northern India, in the Garo Hills, and they're seen in Meghalaya in India and up through Assam, right the way to Bhutan in the Himalayas, and throughout the Himalayas and Tibet. And the people I spoke to were mainly from the hill tribes in the Garo Hills, and they described the Yeti as looking very like a gorilla with long black hair. The Yeti isn't white, it's black, brown or reddish, never white. That's a total fallacy. and very like a giant upright gorilla, about 3 meters, 10 feet tall. And I talked to one guy who said he saw one making a nest, similar to the way the gorillas make nests, and he watched it over 3 days make this nest. And then later he went down to the nest and he found the remains of food in the nest where the thing had been eating. Another one had heard these stories and not believed it until he saw a female in a stand of bamboo, and she was eating the bamboo, and she was sitting down, and even sitting down she was 5 feet tall, and it was suckling a baby. He only saw it from behind, but he saw the baby suckling at her breast, and the mother was eating the bamboo, reaching up and eating the bamboo. Another guy said he saw one, and it made a kind of a threat display, similar to what gorillas do. It was shaking vegetation and roaring, and he ran away. And we found tracks, massive human-like tracks, going along a jungle stream, and they were stopping up boulders, and these boulders had been tipped over, and no human being could have done that. It would take 10 Jeff Capeses to move it, and it was to get at freshwater crabs. They were eating these freshwater crabs. Another guy said that he had a family of them, a male, a female, and a youngster, come onto his plantation. He had what was it? Pineapples. And they were ripping up the pineapples and eating them.
That's crazy. So, Richard, we are coming to the end, unfortunately, but some of these stories I could listen to you all day because some of them are absolutely fantastic. So, do you have another trip in mind? And if so, what are you going to investigate and where are you going?
We're going to Sweden in September to Lake Storjen to look for the Storjen monster, which may be a titanic eel or sturgeon. We were going to go out to Flores to look for Homo floresiensis, which may still be living in the east of the island, but all the trouble with the Middle East, thanks to Benjamin Netanyahu and his genocidal maniacs, they've sort of put the kibosh on that for a bit. So we're doing Sweden.
A little bit closer to home. So, my friend, if people want to read more about some of your expeditions and stories, where can they find you?
Well, the Centre for Fortean Zoology can be found at www.cfz.org.uk. I've written a number of books, including Adventures in Cryptozoology and In Search of Living Monsters. But if you type my name into Google, if you type my name into like Amazon or eBay, you'll see my books. I've written a number of books on my various expeditions. I didn't even get a chance to tell you about the Russian Almasty, which I may have got very close to seeing. The Russians took it so seriously in the time of the Soviet Union, they had the Snowman Commission to look for their wild man. And the head of the Darwin Museum, Peter Smolin, was one of the people in this commission. Marie-Jeanne Kaufmann, who was a famous mountaineer and explorer, and Boris Proshnev, who's a famous scientist. They all took it very, very seriously. And I spoke to lots of people in Russia, ordinary people that had seen these things. They'd come into farms and killed guard dogs with clubs and stole cheese. They'd hurled rocks at people. One guy had one in his garden and he left out bread for it and came and took the bread. And people couldn't understand why scientists from Britain had come all this way for something that they just accept. They think that the Almasty, the Russian wild man, is no more fantastical than a bear or a wolf. And there was one time we were staking out an old abandoned farmhouse, and we put bait out and camera traps. And these things, the people we spoke to, when they make a vocalization, it's like the twittering of a bird. And at about 10 o'clock at night, when it was dark, we heard a twittering noise like a bird, when all the birds should have been asleep. And one of the camera traps went off, and he thought, God, is this the Almasty? And we were waiting till about 2 o'clock in the morning at this old abandoned farmhouse, and we went inside to warm ourselves around a stove, and the door was slightly ajar, and this door was about 7 foot tall, this door, and there was moonlight and starlight coming in, and from outside there comes this deep guttural vocalization. Then something walks along the veranda outside, passes the door where we were, and whatever it was on 2 legs, because it blocks out the starlight and the moonlight to a height of 7 foot plus. And I said to my colleague Adam Davis, it's out there, it's on the veranda. We grab our cameras and rush out, but whatever it was had disappeared into the night. And when we looked at the camera traps in the morning, all we got was vegetation moving about. But some of the people that we were with, there was a Ukrainian biologist and a Ukrainian archaeologist. This is before Putin's evil madness had kicked off. And both of them had seen it. Both of them had seen this creature. The archaeologist, Anatoly, had seen it around the very abandoned farmhouse we'd been staking out. Grey hair, 7 feet tall, walking like a man. And the other guy, the biologist, Gregory, had been asleep in a barn. He'd staked out a barn where this thing was supposed to come out every night and entertain itself playing with the mane of an old mare that was tethered up in there. And the farmer had told him about it. It was a different farm, not the same one. And he said he'd put some food and drink and stuff out for it, and he waited for it, but he fell asleep, and he woke up and the food had all gone. And he saw this creature in the moonlight, and it'd come through a window, and it was there next to the mare, and it was like smacking its lips and making this twittering noise and playing with the mane of the mare, plaiting it, and it had long grey hair. He didn't see the face, he only saw it from the back, and he said he thought it was a young one. It was about as big as a man, but very much more muscular. And then suddenly it leapt up into the rafters and went through the window. With no glass in the window, it's one with shutters, and vanished. But he was like 10 foot away from it, hiding under this mass of hay when he saw it. So I may have come within 12 feet of seeing one of these things when it walked along the veranda in that old abandoned house. But I'll never know.
That is crazy. And like, yeah, some of these stories, it's like, yeah, if only.
Well, the only thing is we've got to keep at it. We've got to keep.
Yeah, I agree.
And when they first went off to try and film the snow leopard in the Himalayas in the early 70s, the BBC and a scientist called George Schaller were there looking for it, and it took them 6 or 7 years to film the snow leopard in the wild. That's an animal we know existed, and they even had them in captivity at the time, but they'd never filmed one in the wild. So if you think about something like a Yeti, which may be a relative of one of the ancestors of man, a highly intelligent primate, a tool user, it would hurl rocks to kill yak and eat them.
Yeah,
we've got. So it's intelligent. We've got a want to be found. So how difficult would it be to find a Yeti?
Yeah, we've got a Bigfoot investigator in the US, and he posted something a couple of days ago that this giraffe escaped from a zoo, and they'd got infrared, they'd got helicopters and all this kind of stuff, and it took them 2 weeks to find this giraffe out in the open. So he says, we're looking for Bigfoot, we're looking for Sasquatch and the like. So if we can't find a brightly coloured giraffe out in the open for 2 weeks, what chances have we got of finding a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot or Mothman or whatever? But like I say, Richard, for now, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, my friend. I've learned so much today. Definitely going to have you back to go into more depth about dragons, because I think that'll be a fun conversation as well. But for now, my friend, thank you for your time. It's almost time to see if England can get through into the World Cup. So we'll let you go, and I look forward to speaking to you again.
Okay, well, I'm trying to get a series off the ground where I go through Africa, Asia, and New Guinea and Australia looking for giant crocodiles. So fingers crossed that this gets off the ground. I've already done a recce for it, and I've filmed a monster crocodile in India. So hopefully it'll get people interested.
Hopefully, my friend. Okay, for now, you take care. Have a
Cheers,
great
mate.
rest of the evening.
And you.
Try and stay
Bye.
cool. Thanks, sir. Take care.